inmendham video. I think I've decided it's going to be an inmendham video, even though it might have some physics in it, but it'll have some other stuff in it for sure, depending on how long the video goes and such. So Piro, idiot, not a nice person. So he's labeled his video "Erroneous Feelings of Recognition." That's what it says. And I mean, can't anybody who's a little bit up to speed in terms of doing this logical thing first say recognition is never erroneous? You never just luckily, erroneously recognize similarities in things. I mean, it's always based on some other connected memory. It's not like I erroneously recognize the similarity between Mars and the 15th planet orbiting some sun in the, Bing Bong galaxy. It's never erroneous recognition. It's cause and effect, and it's by experience and exposure. Now, the feeling of recognition is just another huge flaw. The feeling, recognition can either be an uneasy feeling or a good feeling, depending on what you're trying to recognize, whether you're trying to find something recognizable or whether you're finding nothing recognizable, nothing comforting or comfortable in what you're recognizing. I mean, recognizing that there's an airplane that's not flying right and it's heading right for me, something like that, wouldn't be a good recognition. The feeling would be one of fear and dread and apprehension and all that, because I'm recognizing a threat. The feeling is irrelevant. Again, feelings are just a byproduct of the fact that we're motivated organisms, and the agenda naturally is some sort of preservation incentive, and many of our feelings are based on that self-interest. But that doesn't have anything to do with having a conversation about the meaning of a living thing, being an intelligent organism on planet Earth. It just isn't meaningful beyond recognizing that we have the problem of being sentient and the problem of being naturally selfish, and that those are really problems. They're not solutions. They're not going to help you do logic. They're not going to help you find the truth. They're going to get in your way more than they're going to ever be an asset. So they should be irrelevant to a conversation about meaning. I even did a video, the best part of living. Who cares? Everybody has a different definition of the best part of living. Should we go ask everybody what their favorite thing about living is? Their favorite feeling? I mean, I might have said it was like after work, in the days when I actually, or in the periods of time when I do have employment. And so you spent the last 15 hours, painting walls and doing this and doing, and you have that sort of satisfying feeling when it's done, of a job well done. That's a nice feeling. Now, is that relevant in any way to any conversation that anybody should pay any attention to? Or is that just, some sort of play? Yuck. Useless. Mush. So anyway, on to the video. I've only watched a minute or so, and he starts with something, and then he gets to this, his non-defense to the accusation that science leaped too far off too short an evidence board, and has now caught itself in a weak, mushy quicksand of bad premises. Short-sighted, hard conclusions that it's not going to get itself out of until it figures out that it needs to hit the reboot button. Start over. Open it now.
So, by pointing out that there's these analytic emotions.
Okay, again, it's just a silly thing, a premise, right? So we'll disagree right away. Analytic emotion. They're all consequential emotions. And if they have any analyticness, if there's anything to analyze about them, it's about whether or not they're grounded in something sensible. Like the fact that I can watch somebody else have cancer, I can understand the process and say, that looks like not a good time, and I wouldn't want to have that bad time. I can have an emotional reaction, fear. And when I see it happen to somebody else, I can empathize in the sense I can feel their pain to some extent and find it worrisome that they must endure that trouble. Again, there's nothing intelligent or useful in the emotions. Recognizing that we have them is being intelligent, and it's very useful. But using them as part of anything, doing any analysis, is a huge mistake.
It's evolved in the analytic processes of identification and comparison, the things we use in our logical process.
Yeah. So again, the things we use, no, what your brain does, and what your brain does is make associations. And those associations are, as I argue, are generally speaking reliable, in the sense that our brains function properly. We see trees the way trees really are, in probably all respects, because there's no point. Misinformation isn't helpful. Getting it wrong isn't helpful. The problem is that when we identify bad happening, we have a subjective bias that makes us capable of not appreciating bad when it's not happening to us, because we're selfish, or to our family, or to our kind. And that's not a good thing. That's in conflict and antagonistic to being intelligent and reasonable.
I'm not saying that to try to point out that your emotions are reliable.
I'm just saying you're responsible for how you title your videos and for their tone. And there was every implication of your video that you're making some counter argument to some idea that these are just emotions are just a byproduct. They're not part of the useful conversation about what something really is.
No, your emotions require a lot of double checking.
Why should they require anything? Why should they be relevant? My emotional reaction is not relevant. Understanding the concept of bad, in the sense of suffering is bad, that's perfectly rational. That's a rational declaration of a quality that a state of being can have. There's no need to have an emotion about it.
They're not automatically reliable in cool-headed Vulcan.
They're not useful is the point. There's no point in having philosophy based on how do I feel about that idea? How do I feel about it? No, there's no point in asking that question. How you feel about it is pointless and useless. It's what you can argue as evidence that's useful.
Like intellectual processes. And the only reason to pretend...
Well, I'm just saying, intellectual processes are the only processes that have any legitimacy in having a conversation about the actual reality. Not the reality you're feeling, the reality that is.
That your emotional systems aren't involved with your reasoning is so you...
They're not involved in any constructive way. All they'll do is make you a bigot, an egotist, a self-interested, a kind interested. So it just creates the nepotism and the racism and all the other crap that's totally useless in having a conversation about what's actually happening to sentient brains.
You can pretend that your reasoning is more reliable than it really is.
So again, it's pretending you have reliable reasoning to argue that emotions have nothing to do with facts.
So, for example, Gary's definitely had these feelings of comprehension and
So again, the feelings are totally irrelevant. I've had feelings, no, I've had ideas, and those ideas I recognize as being superior to the ideas you're clinging to. Just as I've had the idea that evolution, an understanding, I've cognized, I've recognized that evolution is I'm just going to, I was going to say infinitely more, but there's no point in saying that. It's just such a superior theory in every respect. It wins, hands down. It's just, it's covered all the bases.
Recognition about his TON system, and back when
the TON system is what it's always been. All right, so now he's arguing these minutia points where I've had to augment or change certain things because I first tried to make it fit their model. So first I got rid of the wave idea, and then I got rid of the idea of bent space, but I kept the standard model of an atom, and so I tried to work within that model, and then I figured out, no, they got that wrong too. Electrons don't spin around doing this, and then. No, none of that shit happens. It's magnetism. It's not the same thing. Just as it occurred to me, I never heard anybody else make this point. It occurred to me that when they look at these other things in the universe, like galaxies, they're thinking like solar systems. And what I've recognized, what I've learned, is that if you think about it, solar systems are collecting matter from space. That's where all the heavy metals come from. They're the byproduct of a supernova somewhere else in the universe. They all got shot here. So solar systems are matter collecting, and galaxies are matter expanding. Galaxies are the death of what might be called black holes, or more aptly, dense matter. I don't think there's black holes per se. There's just dense matter that's not on fire.
Was a trapezoidal system, and when it was
trapezoid, there was never no trapezoid system.
Fish system.
So it wasn't a fish system, and the school of fish analogy is still useful. Just as I think Einstein's wrong about bent space, but using fabric to analogize gravity is still okayish. I mean, as long as you know it's not perfect. And obviously I qualified the fish analogy by saying, well, just think of a school of fish where the fish can only move one speed and they all move the same speed. And then what would be the dynamic of the school? How would the school move? It would move because more fish were going one way than were going the other way. That never changed. That idea never fell apart. So your more fake arguments from you, more distortions and perversions in the name of your dogmatic authoritarian religion. Unevidenced, unproven doctrine.
He had this feeling that they were correct and apt and fit the world perfectly.
And again, the feeling's irrelevant. I was confident when I said, hey, if you think about a school of fish, it's a good analogy. Just as a good analogy for time dilation, and it's still a good analogy. is that if you're dancing as fast as you can in one place, and then I ask you to move left or right, you won't be able to dance as fast because it takes time to move. And that's how velocity, time dilates matter. It's a perfectly apt description. It's going to remain so forever because I'm on the right track and you're defending the wrong track.
Perfectly. Problem there being, we know that they don't.
So he's saying he has some evidence that he's proven that analogy incorrect. That he's proven somewhere, somehow, that the fact that there's a convergence mathematically, and that's all the math they have is a convergence. Einstein's math is just the description of a drain pulling from an infinite source. There's no bent space in the math. Newsflash. Just as the wave theory doesn't have any waves in it. Alright, it has probability in it. It's a theory about the fact that things can go in, say, these things can go in 5 directions. My fingers. They can point 5 ways. And that there could be a system that says, you know, anything that's within 2 inches of this way, all the others are going to get bent that way. And it has to be off this far not to get pulled in. That there can't be any other mechanisms in nature that create probabilities. And there's lots of them.
Those of us that can see that it violates things we already know.
Right, so where's the evidence of that? There's no such fact. So just lie about something you haven't proved. It violates no such thing that you already know. Show me the fact. It's the experimental fact it's in conflict with. Show it to me, liar. Because it doesn't exist. Every piece of your math, again, as I've pointed out in the Susskind videos on the Draft Science channel, has absolutely nothing to do with reality. They're like the underwear gnomes. Okay, they first steal underwear. Second, third, make a lot of money. And physics is doing the same thing. They're saying, events happen, then 2 things go in the box, then nothing, no description, 3 things pop out. They don't do anything with the middle part. That's why they create these fake annihilation operators, annihilation and creation operators. So they think they had their math says when a photon hits a mirror, it annihilates something. Okay, somehow gets annihilated and gets recreated. They don't think, no, the photon though goes in and that replaces some other photon's position. It takes the musical chair some other photon was going to sit in, and so that photon goes out. They don't explain that process. They just pretend it doesn't exist, the whole middle part.
So that's because of emotional issues.
No, it has nothing to do with emotions. It has to do with logic. And the fact that even in high school or grammar school, I could figure out that this stupid wavy description of a photon was insensibly nonsensical. It didn't make any sense. It had no structure. You might as well just reinvent gods, because it says nothing about a structure. It doesn't make any sense. There's no frickin' ether for it to wave in. There's no ocean of fluid, you know. None of that is indicated. It's a thing. It's a something. It's not mush.
And the identification and comprehension side of emotion.
So again, this argument from slanderous emotion. So I'll just say that when you went to high school, a physics teacher stuck his finger in your anus. and it turns you on, and that's why you can't think right. Is that it? I can come up with a pedophile story to duplicate why you're obsessed with your little icons. Maybe Richard Feynman saw you when you were 10 years old, and he made some suggestions, huh? Maybe is that it? Some wave theorist molest you? Is that why you can't get over it?
So this message is about the increased caution that you actually have to have.
Right, and they have none. That's the whole point of my argument. There's absolutely no demonstration of that, okay, except with Newton. Newton was cautious as fuck. Newton wouldn't make it up. Unless he had evidence, he wasn't going to say it. He would talk about it, but he wouldn't publish it as this is my theory. No, because there wasn't enough evidence. And you guys are exactly not like that. You're labeling things like it's, you can't say Franklin was guilty of too much because he had to call it something. He had to identify them one way or the other. One had to be black, one had to be white, one had to be plus, one had to be minus, and he guessed wrong. But you never even fixed it. You haven't even fixed all these different ways of measuring energy. 17 different, Celsius, Fahrenheit, Kelvin, calorie, goes on and on and on. You haven't fixed any of this. Because you're just glued to your traditions. You're the ones with the emotional problems. You can't let go of your traditions.
Instead of pretending that you have some emotion-free process, realizing that you...
Again, no one's saying I'm emotion-free. The argument is this has nothing to do with the process. It's not an emotion that made me think there's got to be a better answer than bent space, right? The nothing tells the something what to do. You think this is a good enough answer? And this is how you're going to explain a convergence? That is, stuff is moving from one place to another because some nothing energy is pushing it. Some energy you don't have to account for is pulling it, by your definition. A pull force made out of nothing. Some field of pullingness. And that's good enough for you? Well, it's not good enough for me. It's a crappy answer.
Even if you separate out the really confusing, the really irrational emotions, like fear, from...
So again, fear is irrational, according to this idiot. And that's why the world's a piece of shit. It's because a bunch of reckless assholes pay no attention to the fear they should have, the apprehension. They should be able to see the, danger, sharks in the water sign, and not be assholes and say, oh, sharks always like me. I'm special. I mean, what is the logic here? And again, this is an asshole who has proven his frailty, proven that he's not a very good sign reader. And he's talking about ignore fear again. Wow. What a dumb fucker.
Your purely analytic process, you're still dealing with the emotions that accompany confusion.
Oh, whatever. Again, confusion isn't the subject. The subject is can we figure out that evolution is the truth? Yes, we can figure that out. We can have the trial and evolution's going to win. Well, what does evolution mean? Well, it means it's a force of that creates complexity, a mechanism that creates complexity. It doesn't create better, it just creates more experienced. It creates things that have a legacy of trial and error. And the trial is based on some, not survival of the fittest by a reasoned definition, but just survival of the thing that beat the shit out of everything else.
Curiosity, right? Identification of things. These feelings of, I've got it, I see it.
Right, so he's not recognizing that the seeing part is the thing that comes first. The recognition comes first, and then the emotion happens where you say, I feel good about myself because I accomplished the task. But I mean, if you're in jail and you're trying to break the lock, with a paper clip, you hear the timbers click and you see the door open before you have the emotion, eureka, I did it. And you feeling good is because the door opened and you're going to get out of jail. It doesn't have anything to do with the logical process that enabled you to pick the lock.
That eureka feeling applied in error and not double checked. And the fact that
so again, that would be my argument that the whole edifice of physics is built on that since Newton. All you sloppy egotists have done is create a bunch of false premises based on just open speculation, and because it fit a little tiny bit and there was no competing theory, you jumped at it. So because Christianity was better than the religion that said, a giant lime tick created the universe, and when you die, he's going to suck your blood forever. Yeah, no one wants to believe in that religion. That's no good at all. That's no fun. And all fun is verboten, and you can never, if you have a pleasurable sensation, the government should kill you. Yeah, no one's going to join that religion. So Christianity, compared to that, wins because they're equally unfounded nonsense, and that's a shitty religion. But that's how science did it. All they said was, well, it's better than the dirty sock theory of how the Earth got to the sun, is moving into the sun. I mean, yes, it could be that all the dirty socks are more on one side of the planet than the other side because people take their socks off when it gets dark and blah, 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 blah. And so you could have some dopey, dirty sock theory of what makes the Earth head for the sun. And okay, bent space is probably better than the dirty sock theory, but it's not better than a rational push force theory. Idiot. And you are an idiot, an obnoxiously arrogant idiot, and it will be written on your tombstone. I'm sorry, but I am right, and and it's only fair that trolls like you, because this is such a dishonest critique. I mean, if this was an honest critique, in the sense that you actually had some evidence, and you actually could demonstrate how science hasn't leaped to conclusions prematurely, fundamental structural conclusions way too soon, based on way too weak an evidence. If you can't concede that, then yeah, you deserve to have it written on your tombstone that you were just a propagandist in defense of a misguided Borg.
It is an emotional process, means you're going to have to double check, and the more intense that feeling of recognition.
And where's the double checking? Again, there's no double checking in the history of this. There's no way to test for something called a magical bent space field that makes things happen. Can't see it, can't find it, can't touch it, can't do anything. It's just, might as well say fairies did it. So it can't even be tested as a theory. And you haven't disproven anything regarding my particle theory, as I've already dispensed with the Feynman critique and problem. So where's your argument? Oh, that's right, you don't have one. All you have is obnoxious ad hominem attacks about how I have some sort of emotional problem, and that's why I don't like physics the way it's written. No, I don't like it because it's not rational. It doesn't simplify, it doesn't unify, it just religifies. You've just created all these magical fields, magical things. Instead of describing physical reality, you just keep creating dark energy, dark matter, dark this, invisible that. You just keep creating fake things, heavens, that do all the work, and call it physics. It's an insult to the word physics.
recognition, the more doubt you're going to have to consciously put on that identification or whichever other emotion that you're feeling.
So again, this emotional crap has nothing to do with the fact that I have a theory that not only simplifies, it unifies, and everything's physical. No magic bits whatsoever.
So confident about. And that is where the confidence comes from, what it's composed of, is your emotional feelings.
No, I mean, what a stupid thing to say. Your confidence comes from emotional feelings. Your confidence comes from the fact that you're not getting any counter argument that has any substance whatsoever. My confidence in evolution is because Christianity they can't ask their God to write his name in a cloud or on a tree. Their God will provide no evidence of his existence, so they're just fucking out of luck. Their UFO won't participate.
The purity that you identified this thing, that some three-step argument is apt and not a fallacy.
Well, I don't buy into any of that dogma about what logic is. So again, that's their problem. Yes, I think the law of non-contradiction is perfectly sensible, but stupid arguments about when an is an is, or silly is-ought gap bullshit and other kinds of nonsense like that are completely, in my opinion, nonsense. There's no gap in the evidence. There's no is-ought gap. As long as you say there is a bad in the universe, there's no problem finding lots of ought statements. They're just all over the place. As soon as something is bad, ought is invented. Not difficult at all.
I'm not saying that I'm not advocating an emotional process. I'm telling you, you're stuck with an emotional process.
No, and I'm saying no. There's absolutely we have no. Our emotions are irrelevant. If I scream these words or in a horrible rage, it makes no difference. The argument is the argument. You're not making an argument. You're making an argument from, I'm just going to presume you insane or emotionally disturbed. I don't have any obligation to actually argue the things you're saying. I don't have to defend physics because you have an emotional problem. I don't have to defend the fact that they really don't have any substantial evidence that photons can be moved by gravity, that they were never able to repeat the original experiment that was supposed to have proven it, and they've never used the Hubble telescope to prove it. So where's your proof except some idiotic lensing images, of that don't even make physical sense, where the lens is preposterously huge and in the wrong place, and they have to invent something called dark matter to make it rational. They have to invent another fairy to fix it. And you say that's good science. I say that's rubbish science. If Newton was alive, he'd be saying, what the fuck? You people don't know what you don't know what you're doing. No wonder you fucked everything up. You just keep jumping to conclusions. So somebody tells you a silly story and you believe it.
In order to be good at it, you have to be good at your emotional logic.
So again, emotional logic, what would that be? What's emotional logic? What? Why would anybody even put those two words next to each other? Oxymoron, right there. A non sequitur. You can't shove those two words together. Logic and emotion. There's no point in doing it. Our emotions don't define the truth. Our emotions are subjective personal reactions that, yes, we have, but they don't prove anything. They're just personal sensibilities. You have to make arguments to prove something. You can't walk into court and say, I have an emotional feeling that he looks like guilty and kinda. Maybe I'm just emotionally reacting because he's wearing a red shirt. I don't know. I emotionally don't like him. That's not evidence of anything. It's rubbish.
How you infer things from your emotions or not.
Well, again, so keep saying it. Well, I'm saying you're doing brain wrong, okay, if you're thinking about your emotions. What you should be doing is emoting about your thoughts. That's what a smart person does. Well, that's what a person who knows what order the horses and the cart go in. And you haven't done any subject, and on this subject you continue to do it backwards.
What inference you take from having a feeling of thinking you've recognized the underlying truth.
A feeling about thinking you recognized, when it's an undeniable fact that you recognized. You didn't feel the recognition first. You saw the recognition first. You thought it. Again, I mean, how can you keep getting this shit backwards?
To the universe and what that feeling means and the confidence of that feeling, that has to be doubted.
The confidence of the feeling, when feeling is confidence is a feeling. I mean, you just can't get around this mush. But what's confident? The feeling of feeling confident is based on what? It's based on the fact that there's nothing to challenge it. It's like the feeling of success when you've painted the walls and they all look well painted. Well, there's no evidence I didn't paint them. There's no evidence that it's a job unwell done. So yes, I have confidence it's a job well done. And I feel good. Now, if somebody shows up and they say, well, look, look with this magnifying glass. Look how uneven that paint is. It's going to peel in 2 weeks. Well, then all of a sudden you're not so confident, right? You don't feel so good. Because somebody provided evidence.
Because of its emotional components. And the only reason to deny this is so that you can pretend that your reasoning is more reliable than it really is.
Again, pretend he's making the accusation that I'm pretending to be confident, or I'm pretending to think I'm right, that somehow I actually know I'm wrong, when no, I know I'm right because it wins on all the categories. I mean, every single category for what a good theory should look like or be, it's got it covered. And bent space doesn't have anything covered. It's not even a rational description of the tiny, the little piece of information that it's supposed to be describing, which is the existence of a convergence that can be caused by lots of things. Lots of things can cause a convergence, can cause things to move somewhere. Not just bent space. So anyway, what lousy arguments. It's just, look. Alright, so this person says, makes sense to me, but then I too, similar to you, like tranquility and the beauty of nature, as you talked about in a previous video. So they're tranquil. I mean, I can understand your personal sensibilities being overwhelmed by warmth and clean air and peaceful sounds and all of that stuff. But to be tranquil with the idea of nature, to appreciate its beauty, yeah, I can see that. To it's like sex or anything else. I can see you falling into it, but to say that somehow it's all brilliant would be idiotic. To not appreciate how gamed we are by the mechanism and how cruel it is. This whole idea of beauty, that something has to be beautiful, or you can't see it, or you can't value it. It has to be beautiful to you. It has to be painted your favorite color. And not to be able to have contempt for that, because you're so distracted by finding your little happy moments. Yeah, that sucks. Alright, let's see how much time I have. Okay, just a little bit. Probably enough for me to finish this other subject I wanted to hit on, because it's related to this nature thing. So there was a couple of things I brought up when I was in that room, and then after I left, they talked about pets. And it was rather annoying, because that Tranquil guy, he used to be Tranquil, that I've been arguing with for years, French guy. Um, he was making all these justifications for preserving the life of animals, and it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, Benatar's book was Better Never to Have Been. I mean, even his Zofti guy, I don't think would sit there and say there's any point in thinking animals are better off being, that subjecting them to the risk of their eventual death and the method of their eventual death are multiple diseases again. I think it's Zofti who said, it's one of those guys, maybe it's the other guy, you know, blessed are the people who die of their first fatal disease or something. But, you know, this is an argument I have made. But it's just such bullshit. I mean, you know, this idea of cutting, you know, forcing an animal into surgery, cutting its nuts off, you know, giving it some sort of, you know, whatever it is, servant life, being a whatever, whatever the word is for those nutless people. Why can I never? It seems an easy one. Drone isn't the right word, but anyway. And then deterioration and death. I mean, there's one of the cats I feed. I mean, I'm not going to, you know, yeah. I mean, emotionally, there's nothing fun about the idea of killing something. But the idea that you're doing it some sort of favor by doing a surgery on it, like that is, you put it to sleep essentially, and then you wake it up again. Well, there's no point in waking it up again. No point at all in stressing it. It's better not to have been. Once it's asleep, a pet doesn't have some agenda. There's not, you know, there's no narrative. It doesn't have a wife and kids to take care of. There's absolutely, it's not going to, doesn't need to go to work to pay its mortgage. It's you know, no one's going to have to clean up its house. I mean, it's just nonsense. It has nothing to do here, okay, but risk being tortured. So waking it up, you know, cutting its nuts off and then waking it up without nuts, okay, you're not doing it a favor. And it's no better than making the organism. It's no better than being Dr. Frankenstein and creating it. So Tranquil isn't an anti-natalist, because every time you put an animal to sleep, in the sense that you anesthetize it for some purpose, why the fuck would you wake it up? Why would you force it back into the world and then throw it back into the wild, throw it back on the streets without its nuts? And you're doing it a favor? That's an act of kindness? I mean, one of the feral cats I got here is getting horribly old, you know, because I take care of it, so it's gotten older than it should be. All right, so yeah, I prevented it from dying one of its earlier 9 lives of death. But it's going blind. You know, there's nothing beautiful in this nonsense. You're not doing any favors. Once it's asleep, leave the sleeping lie. You know, I mean, I think of it, you know, so Piro and his clouds. I wonder if the little animals look up at the clouds, see if they can find their testicles up there somewhere. Is there a cloud that looks like my missing nuts? You know, and then on females, it's even a worse surgery. I mean, you know, you know, it's got to be quite painful either way, but I'm sure the recovery for the females is a lot worse. Why do you have a right to impose that on them? I'm going to tell you it's for your own good. You're going to enjoy it. It's worth it. Yes, I don't know how much painkiller to give you. You're a cat. How the fuck do I know what you're feeling? And then just think about the stress they're imposing on feral animals by capturing them in the first place. I mean, the trauma must be intense. For what? And then to throw them back on the street. I mean, what a fucking pile of shit. You know, I just don't get you people. I don't know if there's anything else I have to say on that, but just one of those. It just really bugs me when people do this bullshit. I'm an anti-natalist, except they have all these conditions where they somehow think living makes sense. It never really makes sense. It's never really a good idea. Like I said, unless you got some indication that the person is going to cure cancer or do something, get a right to die law passed or something, you're just subjecting them to unnecessary risk. So if they're unconscious, don't make them conscious. Duh. Fuck. I mean, you're not an anti-natalist if you think the sleeping should ever be woken up. Just a fact.